The Wet Meadow Vegetation Index of Biological Integrity is a tool that estimates wetland condition based on plants growing in the wet meadow zone. Vegetation is sampled between late July and the end of August along 3 transects perpendicular to the shore that originate from the center of the wetland. The location of these transects should be determined using aerial photography or GIS prior to commencing fieldwork.
Okay, well, what do you have?
So these are the sites that we have in our study area. So,
What is this site right here?
this one?
Yeah.
This tool is only suitable for use in wetlands that possess a wet meadow zone.
So we'll go with this one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Use a random number generator from 1 to 360 to locate an angle from north for the first transect.
So your randomly selected transect is at 64 degrees from north.
Okay.
The subsequent transects are drawn 120 degrees from the original, so that all 3 transects are an equal distance apart. The aerial photograph can then be used as a map to find the transects once fieldwork commences. If there is no wet meadow at the first transect, the entire 3 transects can be rotated so that at least the first transect passes through the wet meadow zone. If the remaining transects do not pass through the zone, their associated quadrats are recorded as having no species. Once in the field, GPS coordinates should be taken at the upland edge and at the emergent edge of the transect.
This way is north, right? Yeah. Okay.
These coordinates will help locate the transect if sampling is repeated in subsequent years. The first measure to make at your transect is the width of the wet meadow zone, from the edge of the emergent to the upland edge of the zone.
Okay, pull it taut, Matt.
At the emergent zone boundary, the wet meadow zone can be identified by a change in species dominance from cattails and rushes to sedges and grasses.
Okay, Matt, pull me back into 15 meters.
The upper boundary of the wet meadow zone is delineated by a change in relative dominance from hydrophytic to terrestrial vegetation. The upper boundary can be confirmed by digging a small soil pit with a trowel to check if the soils are hydric. Vegetation sampling is done in the middle of the wet meadow zone. Sampling is carried out within 2 1 square meter quadrats along each of the 3 transects for a total of 6 quadrats per wetland. Care should be exercised when the zone is narrow to avoid laying quadrats in transitional habitat by placing them about halfway between the emergent edge and the upland edge. The 1 square meter vegetation quadrat is always placed to the right of the transect while facing the open water. Quadrats are placed semi-randomly by throwing them and then arranging their edge to lie parallel to the transect, but in the location where they fall. The first quadrat is placed approximately a meter away from the transect. To ensure accurate quadrat metrics, any vegetation that is rooted outside the quadrat should be carefully removed from it, and any vegetation that is rooted within the quadrat should be moved inside it. The first measure taken at the quadrat is the Ravel pole height. The Ravel height uses a visual obstruction technique as an estimate of vegetation biomass. Denser, taller vegetation will be obscured further up the Ravel pole and yield a larger Ravel height measure than less dense or shorter vegetation. The next step is to identify the various plant species within the quadrat and estimate the percent cover of each species. Percent cover of a species is the percent area of the quadrat that the species occupies based on a bird's eye view. Start by visualizing the amount of the quadrat that is vegetated versus the non-vegetated area. Then determine the proportion of the vegetated area that is covered by each species present. The minimum plant species cover that can be assigned is 0.1%. Any plants that are too small or young to be identified can be lumped together and classified as seedlings or forbs. Plants should be identified using standard taxonomic guides. If any shrubs or trees lie within the quadrat, their percent cover should be estimated at the height of the herbaceous vegetation layer. Vegetation may also be brushed aside to search and find species beneath the dominant herbaceous layer. Plants that cannot be identified should be collected in a field press as voucher specimens for later identification. Once the quadrat has been evaluated, move on to the second sampling. Take 5 large paces to the right of the first quadrat parallel to the shoreline. Collect the same data at the second quadrat as you did at the first. If you are sampling for both vegetation and stress score metrics at this time, this is a good opportunity to collect one of your 3 sediment cores from the emergent zone. Once sampling is completed at the first transect, walk around the wetland to the next 2 transects and perform the same sampling methods, so that wet meadow zone width is measured and vegetation in 2 quadrats are sampled at all 3 transects. Before leaving the site, remember to check that you have filled out your datasheets.